Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Romer. I am a PhD candidate in the Resources and Communities Research Group at Montana State University. Today, I am pleased to share a working paper co-authored with Dr. Julia Haggerty and Dr. Katie Epstein. This presentation summarizes case study work from a multi-year engagement with soil conservation districts in a subregion of the Northern Great Plains. My goal today is to draw attention to an often overlooked local institution, situate them in a particular context, and explore how they may be important actors in a dynamic rangeland resource periphery. To do this, I will begin with the study area context, conceptual and methodological approach, share some early findings from an institutional history and focus group discussion, and then conclude with some summary thoughts and implications. Our case study takes place in the subregion of the Northern Great Plains ecoregion, often noted as the NGP. The NGP is a large landscape that over the last 25 years has gained global conservation attention and recognition for its important biodiversity and ecosystem services. Our subregion focuses on a 6-county region in central Montana that surrounds the Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge. Because of its biodiversity and relatively large amounts of intact native grass and rangeland, this study area has been placed at the center of many of these global conservation efforts. Additionally, the 6 counties have been united for a long time by a shared interest in the CMR's land use policies as they implicate range-based livelihoods such as ranching. This region has long operated as a resource periphery, with mostly range-based land uses and rural economies. In addition to these global conservation efforts, this region is also undergoing dramatic social and ecological change driven by multiple forces, such as economic restructuring, demographic and land use shifts, as well as dramatic changes to climate and disturbance regimes. This study's conceptual framing draws on the literatures on rural and regional resilience, environmental governance, and resource peripheries. Specifically, from the resilience literature that highlights the role of enduring yet adaptable institutions as key to supporting regions and communities to be able to cope with or adapt to shock or change. From the environmental governance literature, we find that during times of transition and upheaval, local institutions can shape the trajectory and outcomes of regional change. And in the resource periphery research that identifies that thick institutional networks are key to regional resilience, yet resource peripheries experience the persistent challenge of limited institutional capacity, and in some contexts operating in the so-called institutional void. Ultimately, these literatures point to the importance of local institutions to resilience of rangeland resource peripheries. Today, we're going to focus on one institution in particular, soil conservation districts, which have emerged as key institutions in our study region. In 1937, a standard state soil conservation district law was developed and proposed to the states by President Roosevelt to promote soil conservation. By 1941, soil conservation districts, local units of government tasked with addressing soil and water challenges and providing district-wide conservation plans were formed in 41 states. It's been argued that these districts constitute the United States' first and last federal supported rural planning districts. Montana was not long behind that US model law when it passed the Montana State Soil Conservation District Law in 1939. which defined a soil conservation district as a legal subdivision of the state established by farm and ranch owners and operators, permitting group action in dealing with problems in soil erosion, moisture conservation, soil fertility, and land use. Each conservation district board is governed by a board of elected supervisors and is empowered to study and formulate programs to deal with local conservation problems. They're encouraged to collaborate with local, state, and federal agencies to assist in executing their programs and reach out for technical and financial assistance. Over 80 years since their establishment, there are now 58 districts that represent all counties in the state of Montana. In the literature, there's very little written about soil conservation districts, and definitely not very much recently. Most of the natural resource governance lit identifies them as stakeholders in larger natural resource management processes. Only recently, in other rangeland contexts in the Western US, conservation districts have been recognized as key sources of information essential for program implementation and natural intermediaries. To better understand how these institutions evolved and learn more about how members of the conservation district boards understand their mandate and role in this dynamic region, we asked, how has the formal mandate soil conservation districts changed over time? How do members of the conservation districts themselves interpret this mandate? And what do they see as their responsibilities in this dynamic region? Our approach included two early phases. We used policy, document, and lit review analysis to characterize the evolution of conservation districts with respect to their mandate, purpose, and responsibilities. Then we conducted 6 semi-structured focus group interviews with board members in the study region to better understand who are the members, what do they identify as key responsibilities, their challenges, and priorities. These interviews were conducted in conjunction with their board's regularly scheduled monthly meetings and included many scenic drives across the landscape in all 4 of Montana's travel seasons, illustrated on the right. We interviewed a total of 40 participants, including staff, board members, and board supervisors. We are currently in the process of member checking some of these findings with the boards themselves. Our institutional history has identified several key points and shifts in federal conservation policy and priorities, which in turn shaped and reshaped soil conservation district mandates and responsibilities at the local level. I'll briefly share some of these key points and implications for the conservation district mandates. So as I mentioned earlier, these institutions emerged out of the New Deal conservation era. This was a period characterized by the social and environmental turmoil of the 1929 stock market crash, Great Depression, and Dust Bowl. Here, along with the Agricultural Adjustment Acts, Soil Conservation Acts that constituted the conservation establishment, the 1937 Soil Conservation District Law and subsequent 1939 law in Montana established conservation districts with an explicit focus on inventorying and setting up studies of a district's agricultural resources and conservation problems in order to determine the work and plans needed on the district. There is an explicit focus on providing direct federal support to farm and ranch operators and the application of on-the-ground conservation practices to the physical landscape. Several decades later, as part of the environmental decade in the 1970s, the emergence of federal policies to regulate clean air and water shifts the mandates of conservation districts away from soil conservation efforts at the property scale to more regulatory efforts and activities that support soil and flood control, watershed protection, and water quality more generally. This is exemplified in Montana when in the 1970s in the Natural Streambed Protection Act, conservation districts are charged with processing and enforcing 310 permits, which regulate projects on perennial streams. A few years later, we see another evolution alongside the nation's more general shifts towards deregulation as part of the Reagan era. Here, renewed interest in devolved governance reinforces the responsibilities of CDs as a de facto local environmental institution and motivated very targeted, impact-oriented conservation work. However, at the same time, the Food Security Act 1985 solidified federal involvement in these rangeland peripheries when it established the Conservation Reserve Program. This program removed environmentally sensitive land from agricultural production. Today, we still see conservation districts as a linking organization between federal funding and local action. The vestiges of past eras are still visible in today's conservation districts priorities in terms of providing assistance, enforcing regulation, and working on concentrated projects for critical areas and meeting critical needs. But to expand on how conservation districts understand their role today, we turn to focus group discussions that reveal 3 key priorities related to how conservation districts view their role and responsibility in the current context. These themes reflect the enduring nature of these historical mandates, but also the tensions presented by the dynamics shaping the region today, as it faces significant social and ecological change in an area characterized by institutional thinness. So the first theme is an emphasis on putting conservation tools in farmer and rancher hands. This theme reflects conservation district's original 1930s mandate as an organization that focuses on technical support specifically for rural producers. For many of our respondents, this looks like putting on educational workshops, creating tool lending libraries, and ultimately supporting on-the-ground work. Though this aspect of conservation district activities was fundamental in the eyes of nearly every participant, our conversations revealed a tension in maintaining this priority in the current context. Many participants noted that things are getting increasingly political, and one respondent described, "We are supposed to be giving education to private landowners. Instead, we are always dealing with the federal land managers." Another conservation district noted, "Conservation districts used to be able to work on actual projects, and now it seems that everything is political. We host a lot of education out and outreach workshops. I think that those on-the-ground projects that once happened with conservation districts are hard to come by anymore." Along these lines, focus group participants shared their concerns about natural resource management generally, social and land ownership change occurring in the region, and the subsequent increase of non-local actors and stakeholders. They described a key responsibility as the need to protect the local perspective in aspects of landscape level decision-making as an important conservation district responsibility and priority. For many of the districts, this has looked like requesting training on how to better interact with federal managers and stakeholders. Additionally, for some others, they rely heavily on individual members or chairmen to represent them in these regional discussions. As in the case of one district supervisor described by a board member in this way: "I'm glad that our board chairman is as involved as he is. As much as he runs to those meetings in Helena, I don't know if any other board has a chairman like that. He's a big source of information because he sits on a lot of other boards. So not only our county and district rely on him, but a lot of other counties use him for representation." Relatedly, the last theme describes the efforts that conservation districts take on to preserve legacy and heritage. Amidst rural restructuring, the discussions with the Conservation District Board members see an important role of theirs as protecting the rural ways of life. As one participant noted, I'm a proud member of the Conservation District because I think that we have a part in being gatekeepers to the conservation of our land, our water, and our agricultural economy. In addition to the increasing land ownership change and outside stakeholders gaining more participation in the region, participants identified concern about losing rural schools and services. One participant said, "Kids are getting pulled away from their roots and our school is facing shutdown every day. How can we keep agriculture and conservation part of the school curriculum?" To participants, losing rural schools mean children are spending less time at the ranch and becoming disconnected from their heritage. They see this as one of several opportunities to or responsibilities to their board. So to conclude and summarize, we are seeing soil conservation districts emerge as important local actors in this region that's characterized by, a set of social and ecological dynamics, large scale change in the region, and limited institutional capacity to address these challenges. Their formal mandate, as shown in the institutional vignette, has been the role for a long time to translate federal conservation priorities and resources to local context. This has been either by direct assistance, enforcement of environmental regulations, or operating as an intermediary between local landowners and state and federal land managers. In addition to their formal mandate, members of the Conservation District Board themselves identify a broader set of responsibility that address the dynamics shaping the region. To the extent they have the capacity to do so is an open question. And for the folks in this session today who are particularly interested in understanding further rural geographies and resilience, I think one of the key takeaways is that conservation districts present an important opportunity for understanding social change and institutions in these rangeland resource peripheries. With that, I'll conclude. I'm really looking forward to our discussion on Thursday. Thank you.